Welcome to Commodity Flux, the podcast where we track the trends, turns, and turbulence shaping global commodity markets. Today we're joined by Liao Na, Chief Consultant of Energy Policies, to break down the Qatar shock, the Strait of Hormuz disruption, and what it all means for China's energy security and exports. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
Let's start with gas. With Qatar's facilities offline and the Strait of Hormuz effectively a no-go zone, how vulnerable is China's energy security right now?
In the very short term, not as vulnerable as the headlines suggest, China actually has a pretty formidable strategic moat for the next few weeks. LNG terminal inventories are up roughly 9% year on year, which means we're looking at about 6.7 million tons sitting in tanks. That's a solid 3 to 4 week buffer.
So there's some breathing room built in.
Exactly. And it's not just inventory. We're also in a seasonal sweet spot. As we move out of winter, gas demand naturally softens. Put those two together, and you can see why Beijing is not smashing the panic button right now.
But that doesn't sound like a permanent solution. Where's the real stress point?
The stress point is what we call the supply chain cliff. Since March 2nd, the main artery through the Strait of Hormuz has basically been cut. The strait is close to silent. There are still tankers arriving that cleared Hormuz before the attacks, and those will keep landing cargoes this week. But our math shows that by late March or early April, that waterborne pipeline from the Middle East will run dry if the situation doesn't improve.
So after that 3 to 4 week buffer, the picture changes pretty sharply.
That's right. The comfort of the moat gives way to the edge of the cliff. If the blockade or effective shut-in of flows persists into April, China has to lean much harder on alternatives.
How different is China today compared with, say, the 2021 period when it comes to gas security?
It's quite a different landscape. Over the last 5 years, Beijing has been laser focused on what we at GL Consulting call energy sovereignty. First, on the domestic side, China's own gas production grew more than 6% last year and now covers around 60% of total gas supply. That's the highest share we've seen in years.
So more gas is coming from home rather than overseas.
Exactly. Second, there's the Russian pivot. The China-Russia East pipeline was fully completed last year. Pipeline gas now accounts for nearly 47% of China's total foreign gas intake. That makes Russia a crucial pillar in China's non-seaborne gas strategy.
But there's still a large LNG piece, and a lot of that used to come from the Middle East. Are there any other levers China can pull if Hormuz stays shut?
There is one big geopolitical wildcard, the United States. China has not imported US LNG for over a year due to the tariff war, despite Chinese firms purchasing volumes under long-term contracts and largely diverting them to Europe. If the Middle East remains offline, Beijing faces a significant supply gap. Even if China stops reselling volumes from its other long-term contracts into the global market and keeps every molecule at home, we still see an annual shortfall of about 1.5 million tons.
So even with domestic production up and Russian pipeline flows strong, there's still a gap.
Correct. That gap is what could necessitate a policy adjustment. If the strait doesn't reopen within roughly 30 days, we think there's a real possibility of a pragmatic shift in energy trade, with Washington potentially including a rollback of LNG tariffs to address the shortfall.
And what about prices? How does market pricing change China's behavior here?
Price is the ultimate circuit breaker. If spot LNG prices climb to around $15 per million British thermal units, we expect Chinese buyers to start pulling back. If prices blow past $20, China will likely walk away from the spot market almost entirely. That level of volatility is already scaring smaller private importers. They are retreating under the umbrella of the big three state-owned giants. In a world of chaos, everyone wants the protection of a state-backed balance sheet.
Let's turn to oil. Prices are creeping up and the geopolitical heat is rising. Is China going to pull back on crude imports, and will we see even more discounted Russian barrels flowing east?
The way we look at it is simple. In times of peace, China watches the price. In times of chaos, China watches the policy. The starting point here is inventory. Most analysts will tell you China has about 120 days of oil in reserve. Our work suggests the real number is closer to 240 days, roughly 8 months of breathing room.
That's a huge difference. How do you arrive at that?
If you take cumulative imports plus domestic production from 2008 to today and then subtract total refinery throughput over the same period, you get a surplus of roughly 530 million tons. That's what we call broad spectrum inventory. It goes beyond the official Strategic Petroleum Reserve and includes oil held by the big state firms and independent refineries. Commercial stocks at key ports are at their highest point since 2024, so China has plenty of fat on the bone to withstand a 1 to 2 month supply shock without breaking a sweat.
So inventories give Beijing time and options. What role does Russia play in this picture now?
Russia is absolutely central. It's already China's #1 crude supplier, and that's not just about discounts. It's about what we call the security of the pipe. The main pipeline capacity is around 30 million tons a year, with the ability to ramp up to about 45 million in an emergency. Unlike a tanker squeezed in the Strait of Hormuz, a land-based pipeline is very hard to blockade. We've already seen Russian flows into China spike by more than 100% in February, even before this latest round of tensions. Russia has become China's strategic anchor in a world of maritime uncertainty.
So short term, more Russian crude, more reliance on pipeline security. But is that the whole story?
Not at all. The deeper story is that this crisis is accelerating China's internal energy revolution. Beijing is acutely aware of its strategic fragility when it comes to foreign oil. That's why we saw a historic milestone last year. China's installed wind and solar power capacity officially overtook coal.
That's a pretty striking shift.
It is. China is moving toward peak oil demand faster than the market assumes. By 2030, we expect oil's share of primary energy consumption to fall significantly, displaced by what we call the green triad: wind, solar, and electric vehicles. So, yes, China will keep buying Russian crude to stabilize the present, but it is sprinting toward a future where it doesn't have to care nearly as much about what happens in the Strait of Hormuz. For long-term investors, the message is clear. China's oil demand is not just flattening, it is being structurally engineered to decline.
Let's shift to trade. China is still the world's factory. When the Middle East catches fire, how does that feed through to Chinese exporters' bottom lines? Are we looking at a meaningful hit to their competitive edge?
We think this is the most critical secondary effect of the conflict, and it's often underappreciated. Economically, this isn't just a regional war, it's a massive supply-side shock that hits Chinese exports with what we call a two-pincer attack.
Walk us through those two pincers.
The first pincer is the cost push effect. China's manufacturing machine runs on energy and petrochemicals. When oil and gas prices spike, the entire value chain feels it. Take methanol as an example. Iran supplies over 50% of China's methanol imports. If that flow stops, it's not just a handful of traders who get hurt. It ripples through the methanol to olefins plants along the East Coast, raising the cost of everything from plastics to synthetic fibers.
So, raw material inflation quickly becomes product inflation.
Exactly. When your feedstock and power bills jump, your FOB export prices have to move up as well. In an ultra-competitive global market, even a 2% or 3% price increase can test the price elasticity of Chinese goods and start to erode the made-in-China price advantage. And there's a macro layer. The OECD's rule of thumb is that every $10 increase in oil prices adds about 0.5 percentage points to global inflation. That pushes interest rates higher in Europe and the US, which effectively cools the very consumer demand that Chinese exporters rely on. It's a classic stagflation trap.
That's the cost side. What about the second pincer?
The second pincer is the logistics nightmare. The Suez Red Sea shortcut is breaking down. When ships have to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, you add 10 to 15 days to the journey. That's not just an inconvenience, it's a direct hit to just-in-time manufacturing. If you're a fashion retailer in Paris or an electronics manufacturer in Berlin, you can't afford your components arriving 2 weeks late. Those delays push up freight rates, insurance premiums, and inventory carrying costs.
So, we're not just talking a bit more expensive shipping.
Right. This goes beyond higher freight bills. It's a fundamental challenge to the supply chain resilience that China has spent decades building. We're moving from an era of efficiency first to security first, and that transition is expensive. For Chinese exporters, that new security premium is effectively a tax they never planned for, but now have to pay.
A lot to digest there. Energy security, Russian pipelines, green transitions, and a looming export squeeze. Thanks to Liao Na for laying it all out.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Commodity Flux. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe to stay updated on global market trends. Until next time, keep tracking the flows.